team. How excited am I? Nick Montgomery. I can't believe it's taken me this long to get you on this show. And I tell you what, the producers always tell me you have to grab people's attention straight away, so I am going to go straight to the famous photo of you playing against Cristiano Ronaldo. Because I want to ask you, what would it be like to play against Cristiano Ronaldo? Think about that. But you did. Tell us that experience, and then I want to go way back.
So yeah, I mean, you know, to play against what's considered one of the greatest players in the world, you know, at the time it happens, I just remember lining up in the tunnel at Old Trafford and looking to my right hand side, and yeah, you know, the great Man United team and Cristiano Ronaldo there, a young Cristiano Ronaldo. But yeah, it's just that surreal moment where I'm thinking, you know, I'm a local boy from Leeds, you know, from a council estate with a normal background, and dreamed of playing in the Premier League and watching Match of the Day. And then the next thing, it's fast forward, you know, probably 6-7 years after being in professional football and standing next to one of the greatest players of all time. And yeah, it's weird, it's sort of exciting, but also thinking I can't wait to get on the pitch and you know, tackle him and just get out there and enjoy the game. So yeah, it's a bit of a surreal moment, but you know, it's what you always dream of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel it's more surreal now because of who he became. But that, you've just said it, really, you were just lining up against, you just couldn't wait to go and tackle him, right? Like, and at the stage he was just a young kid, but now you've seen him become who he is, you must sit back with your own kids and, hey, have a look at this picture, this is Dad, you know? Like, it is pretty crazy, but that team he was in, let's drop a few other names, because he was only a young kid. Like, there was some big names
Ryan
in that team.
Giggs, Wayne Rooney, yeah, just so many, so many world-class Premier League players. And again, as a young boy watching Match of the Day and just dreaming of playing in the Premier League, that's when you look back now. And I've got 3 girls. They're not bothered about football, but I think it's one of them, you know, I tend not to sort of look back on the past of my own career. Now I'm coaching, but it often gets brought up and people ask a question, and yeah, playing in the Premier League at that era, you know, against some of the greatest players of the Premier League era, and you know, was something that I always cherish. And yeah, the experiences I've took from playing is really what's built me as a coach now, and I try to bring a lot of them experience to my coaching.
Yeah, you've mentioned coaching there, and there's obviously some experiences and influences in your life that have led you to here. I've tried to get on this podcast coaches that will help inspire other coaches or teachers or parents even, or athletes even. I mean, will definitely inspire young footballers if they happen to watch this. So can I just ask you about some influences you had? You mentioned you grew up pretty humble beginnings. Can we go way back there, and when you first started playing football and your love of this game that you've put a lifetime into?
Yeah, so I had one brother, 18 months older than me, and yeah, look, I came from a bit of a working class background, and at the time at school, a lot of my friends were involved in crime, stealing cars, and you know, ended up bank robbing and armed robbery and stuff. So it's actually, when I think back, it's pretty crazy, but that was normal for me, and it was, yeah.
Pause. Did you rob a bank?
No, never. Okay. No.
Let's clear that up. Let's clear that up.
For the reference, I never robbed the bank.
So sounds like football may have saved you, but anyway, keep going. Sorry for that.
So I went to a normal school and yeah, just fell in love with football, and that was just kicking it around in the street and kicking it against the wall and the fence and driving all the neighbours crazy. And yeah, just that's all I wanted to do, and I just dreamt at a young age of being a footballer, and I used to go and watch Leeds United. I didn't have anyone in the family that liked football. You know, my mum and dad supported me, my brother supported me, but they never really had any passion for football. And then yeah, it was just sort of from then on I started playing local football, and then Leeds schools football, and then I was picked up by Leeds United at I think 10 years old. Yeah, which again, you look now, I think 10 years old at Leeds United, and big club and playing Saturday, Sunday, just constantly playing football and training throughout the week. And then I got to 16 and sort of left school, and at that point, again, this could be a long story, I'll make it pretty short, but I sort of had the option to stay at Leeds and work to try and get a scholarship for when I finished school, with no guarantee, because I'd had glandular fever and missed a lot of training. So I spoke to the coach at the time and just said, look, am I guaranteed to get a scholarship contract when I leave school? And he couldn't really give me an answer, so I took it upon myself and I spoke to my mum, who wrote a letter. Can you believe it? I feel old now. She wrote a letter to loads of clubs around Yorkshire, Sheffield United, Barnsley, Sheffield Wednesday, and just explaining that, she had a son and I wanted to be a footballer, and I'd been at Leeds United and I wanted to guarantee that I was going to be a footballer when I left school. And Sheffield United wrote back, offered me a trial. I had one game, and the coach at the time, a guy called Russell Slade, who went on to coach Leyton Orient, Yeovil, some Sheffield United at one point.
Yeah.
And he just offered me a 2-year scholarship straight after the game, and that was it. I took it with both hands.
Mate, I just got goosebumps. Seriously, I'm not exaggerating. When you talked about your mum there, like, you said she didn't even love football, but she had this, she sounds like all mums do really, the love they have for this, they'll support you with anything, right? Oh. She hand wrote a letter to all these clubs. My God.
I know, it makes me feel old, but God bless my mum, she passed away 2 years ago. But yeah, I always look back after I got in the first team, and again, any kids watching, the amount of hours my mum put in, especially working 10-hour, 12-hour shifts. She'd come home, pick me up and drive an hour across Leeds, take me training 3 times a week. And when you look back over, the course of that time when you're a young player, and just a sacrifice that she gave up, to make it actually in the first team and professional, was, without her would have been virtually impossible. And I know the parents nowadays, the amount of effort they put into the children, can never be underestimated.
Mate, that is, to be honest, mate, a lot of the listeners are all mid-20s, 30s, 40s. I'm not getting many young people unless I do a little Instagram post or whatever, but that message is so powerful, mate. Like, some of the parents out there, and I think young kids will only think about it when they're older, how much mum and dad actually did. Like, what a special lady your mum was. But the actual handwritten letter, that's just blown me away. So you mentioned at 10 years old, you're now 41. Yeah. So 10 years old in Leeds United. So for 31 years, all you have ever known is elite football, like elite. So there's no wonder why you're going so good in only is this your second year?
Yeah, second season.
Second season of head coaching. There's influences along the way in the coaching game. Can we drop any names there? And is there any lessons you've learnt that by you sharing them will help the listeners?
Yeah, so I think, again, without dragging it out, a big story, which it definitely is. I left school at 16. I moved to Sheffield, which was only an hour and a half away. I moved into Diggs. The first 2 years of my scholarship was littered with a broken ankle the first year. The second year, I actually got meningitis. I was in hospital for 2 weeks on a drip. And then Neil Warnock, the famous Neil Warnock, came in. Sheffield United was a sleeping giant, and he came in and he was a Sheffield United fan. Didn't really know what had happened the 2 years before, didn't care, and he just wanted people that were committed to the club, that had passion, desire. And I just got over the meningitis, and I was playing in the reserves at the time, scored a hat-trick against Stockport, and the next day I was in training with the first team, and it happened that quick. And then the following day he said, "You're travelling to Norwich." And I always tell the story, actually, that was around the time when there wasn't really that many football agents around, but they just started to come into the game, and a lot of the young players were getting agents, and it was a real sort of transition time in football when the money started really coming in.
Yeah.
And I always remember being on the bus, and back in the day it was a team bus, and all the young players, like a 4-hour drive to Norwich, you'd go the day before, and the first team boys would literally be asking for cups of tea and stuff. You'd sit down and then they'd ask again. So for 4 hours you're just walking up and down the bus, delivering coffees and teas, and again, that was tradition back in the day. The young boys were there to facilitate the older boys, and again, it was part of your grounding. And I remember Neil called me down the front of the bus, and I sat down, and he just said, I saw you play against Stockport a couple of nights ago. I love what I see. And he said, if I told you I want to offer you a new contract now, you're going to be on the bench tomorrow at Norwich, what would you say? And I just said, yeah, I'll sign it. And he said, good, because if he'd said no, I've got an agent, I would have told you to go back to the back of the bus. So you look back on them key moments, and a few boys before me had sort of got in that situation and said, speak to my agent, and Neil was really old school. And he just said, all right, speak to your agent, no problem, off you go. I always just look back on that moment, and the next day I made my debut at Norwich, away at Carrow Road, and had a great game. And then after the game, Neil sort of said to all the boys, like, he put more effort in than most of you did the whole game, because we were winning the game 2-0. I think it went 3-2 to Norwich, and he threw me on at that point, and for 30 minutes I ran my socks off, and for him to compliment me after the game in front of everybody, and that was it.
You remember that?
And that was it. I ended up 400 games for Sheffield United, there for 14 years in total. And I think I've got the most appearances in the last century for any player for Sheffield United. That was sort of so that was sort of one chapter closed, and I moved over here at 30 years old.
You just mentioned there you ran your socks off. So could I go to the characteristics of what you value in your position, midfielder, right? Talk to me about that, because you just said you ran your socks off. I remember watching you when you came here to Australia, and now you say that's what I think. If I think you, that's what I think. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Look, I think as a player, I knew what I was good at. I could run more than anybody, and to be honest, I had a manager, Neil Warnock, who believed in me at 17 years old, 18 years old, to throw me in the first team at championship level. And the only reason he did that is because I could run, and I would tackle, and I would chase everything, and I'd do anything he asked. And to be honest, that went through my career. And the biggest thing I say to young players now is, you have to know your strengths, because of course I wanted to be Cristiano Ronaldo and dribble people and score goals, but that wasn't my strength. My strength was winning the ball back, giving it to players like, I remember Peter Runlove, one of the best players I ever played with. He was the first African player ever to play in the Premier League. He was a Zimbabwean international, and I just won the ball and give it to him every time, because he was just magic with the ball. I knew what I was good at, and I worked on my strengths more than anything, as well as your weaknesses, of course. But sort of, my assets as a player, sort of, that's what made me the player that I was, and I think that's something that a lot of players get confused with. Yeah,
I think there's definitely something even a little bit deeper there. Your character as a player, I don't think you would ever be beaten on effort. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
You never
definitely, and
effort.
Look, I think effort is non-negotiable. It's, if you lack effort and if you can't put effort in, then it's got to be the number one fundamental. You have to put the effort in, because everything else is a byproduct of the effort you put in. And again, working on your strengths. But there's definitely non-negotiables, and effort and honesty is one of them.
Yeah. Now, when we turned up today, you mentioned one of the first things you said to me is you really enjoyed the Ivan Cleary podcast episode, which we might even link to the bottom of this one. I've always found you, whenever we've spoken, you're really keen on learning off other sports. But in particular, there is a bit of a love for rugby league. What is it about rugby league that you love? This thing about learning off other coaches, is that how long has this been in you forever? Because as long as I've known you, I've always felt that you've always been looking to learn. There's no wonder why you're at the top of the A-League game, but I see you going way past the A-League because of your mentality of coaching. Learning off other coaches. Talk to me first about the Ivan Cleary bit, but other coaches or other people you follow, or this thirst for knowledge and this, it's a characteristics of the best coaches I've ever met and ever worked with, and you've got it. That's why I think you won't be in the A-League for too long. But can you elaborate a bit on that for me?
So going back to the rugby, I grew up in Leeds, and goes right back to my childhood. I went to a rugby school, and my next door neighbour, semi-detached house with two Leeds Rhinos players, right. And Mark and Stephen Campbell, and their dad Phil they were just obsessed with rugby, hated football.
Yeah.
And I was next door, loved football, kicking against the fence. My brother was like a street fighter boxer, so next to each other, semi-detached house, we had 4 young boys that, 2 rugby, 1 football, 1 boxing, and we didn't get on well at the start, and then we got on really well, and I'm still in touch with them now. But yeah, that's where the sort of the rugby sort of side came from it. And I was always a physical player, so the biggest thing I love about rugby is just the tackles and just the power of the players. And I enjoyed playing it for a while at school, but then football was my only passion. And then to your point then about the different coaches, I think team sport there's so much you can learn from other coaches, whether it's basketball, rugby, football, because ultimately I think team sport is about a group of men or women or kids, whatever it is, and it's really about winning the hearts and minds of that group and then following you in what you want. And I think your sort of personality and the way you are as a person, I think that dictates how the team ultimately behaves and plays, and just learn from leadership. And I think if I can look over my career as a player, I learned some really good stuff from the great coaches. I learned stuff not that I didn't like from bad coaches, but even from the bad coaches and people I didn't like, I learned some good stuff from them. So I think it's about taking your own strengths and qualities and learning from experience of other people. And I think that's what really rounds you as a coach. It's your own experiences, good and bad, and that of other people that you really trust and you've got a lot of respect for. So yeah, it's amazing listening to different people's stories and how that can relate to your environment and the situation that you're in.
Awesome, and it's even better that you follow the podcast. You mentioned there something which I love, because I knew there was something else. I knew just watching you as an athlete, but then as a coach, and just you get this feeling of you as a person. You don't take a backward step. And you mentioned the brother, street fighter, boxer, the neighbours, the rugby league. It's all coming together. What I see of you when I picture you as a player, but as a coach, I just love that bit you said about the hearts and minds of your team. I felt it when I walked in here today. I felt this little connection out there with your players, and there was some families, and it just seems like there's something really good happening here. It does not matter about the facilities. I know you're going to go and work for a multi-million-dollar organisation, hundreds of millions,
Maybe,
but do you know what? The value in you is it doesn't matter if you're in a little old place like this, because the values you have and just you as a person. I really feel that when I walked in here, mate.
Look, the Mariners is a really special club. It's a real community club, and like you said then, the biggest thing, we talk about family. We want to be one big family, and I come from a mum who just showed me so much love, and to be honest, I love all the players here and the staff, and I think if you give them that love, they'll give it back to you. And I think to do that, the only way you can do that is be honest with them, and that's one thing that I learned mainly from Neil Warnock as a coach. He was always honest, like it or don't like it, he'd tell you if you were playing, he'd tell you why you weren't playing, and you could always talk to him. And I always said to myself, if I'm going to be a coach, the biggest thing I respected about him was that he was honest. And there was some times when I would play really well, the next game he would leave me out of the team, on the bench, but he'd pull me into the boot room with all the polish and dirty boots around, quite nervous, and he would say, I know you're not gonna agree with me, but I'm gonna leave you out for this reason, and that's my reason. And I always respected that, even if I didn't agree with him. I 100% respected him, and I'd always say, no problem, Gaffer, I'm ready when you need me.
Yeah.
And I always said to myself, when I became a coach, I'll always be honest.
Yeah.
Good, bad or indifferent. I think the players really respect that.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many coaches that don't do that, and I can never understand it, because everybody's human.
Yeah.
And I think honesty and treating everybody with respect and love is the only way that they're going to give it back to you. And again, that's my my principles, not my philosophy. That's me as a human, the way that I want to be as a coach. And I think that's a real powerful thing when you do that.
Yeah. Okay. You can see that, mate. You can see it, and in any of the other episodes, you'll feel that in the other great leaders. Speaking of great leaders, Mike Phelan, who we had, who's only on the audio version. We don't have him on the YouTube channel, but on the audio version, there's an episode with Mike Phelan, who was assistant to Alex Ferguson for a long time, who's coached, who's captain, who's played for England. He spoke of you very highly, very highly. So I want people to go and listen to the Mike Phelan episode. But also, what are your thoughts on someone like Mike? You met him, you've stayed in touch with him. Talk to me about Mike Phelan, because I want to ring him to say, listen to this, Mike.
Look, again, firstly, it's really humbling that Mike speaks highly of me, number one, because we're talking about one of the greatest coaches and assistant managers of all time, and that's a fact. It's cool. Obviously it's really humbling that Mike speaks highly of me, and I knew Mike when I was a player, obviously at Sheffield United, and I'll always never forget when he burst a balloon and Alex Ferguson nearly jumped off his seat. That gets replayed, and we had a laugh about that. And just so happens, I think everything in life happens for a reason. I'm a massive believer in that. I just retired from playing here, and to be honest, I was going through that difficult transition, which anyone listening to this podcast who's been in rugby or football or any sport, when you come to the end of your playing days, you have to be passionate about something, and that transition is really, really hard, and that's why so many people struggle. But you need good people around, you need a good family, and I've got a beautiful wife and three beautiful girls. And I always wanted to be a coach, and I felt that for a long time, even playing. I wanted to finish and be a coach, but the reality is it's not easy. You're going from coming in, everything's out for you, you're a player, you got your schedule, to all of a sudden, I'm coaching under 12s, under 14, 15 kids, and I was in a role coaching in the youth academy, and Mike Phelan came out, and a new head coach came in and asked me to be his second assistant. And Mike came out as a sporting director, which Mike Charlesworth, the previous chairman, still the owner, met Mike in England and brought him in, and instantly, as soon as he said Mike Phelan was coming in, it gave me a massive lift. Yeah. And as soon as he got here, I wanted to spend as much time with him as possible and pick his brain, really. And Mike will probably laugh, but he got done for speeding in Australia, and for me that was the best thing ever, because that meant I could pick him up every morning. Yes. Spend 40 minutes in the car with him here, 40 minutes back, and again, I was just in that transition, and just to be able to pick the brain of someone that worked with the greatest coach of all time, in Alex Ferguson. Not only that, I was massive on youth development, and that's a big passion of mine. David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, Gary Neville, you look at the famous young players that came through the great Man United team, and Mike was there through all of that, not only coaching them, mentoring them, and I just took so much from everything he said. I wrote it down, and I couldn't believe that someone like Mike Phelan was over here, and I was working with him at a time when I was actually pretty down, it was an amazing couple of months experience, and Mike is a great mentor for me. I speak to him all the time, and he's just such a genuine, humble guy that you can pick the phone up to him anytime, and he's always got time for me. And throughout my journey here, he's been there as a mentor, and you know, to pick the phone up and talk to someone like Mike and him give you the time. It's just, yeah, I never take that for granted.
Mate, I love that answer, your honesty first of all, and your vulnerability a little bit there for the listeners. Like it's a mentally tough time to acknowledge it, and it seems like you know, that's probably another podcast altogether. It seems like you went through a bit of a dark time that, like you say, nearly all professional athletes will go through. Like they might not know it, but it's coming.
No, it's
yeah.
100%. It's, you know, it's so difficult, and right now Matty Simon, one of the greatest Mariners players of all time.
Yeah.
You know, he finished through injury, and straight away I brought him onto my staff. He's very close to me now. He's he helps with the recruitment, but you know, he was going through a similar tough time, and I think, you know, any ex-player that's been through that situation, the best person to help someone is someone that's been through that, because it's so hard to understand it, you know, because you've been institutionalized for so long. Everything's been done for you. Your life's run by a schedule, and all of a sudden the four walls of the dressing room are taken away from you, and at times you feel worthless. And you know, I was a second assistant. I'd coaching the young kids, and I wanted to be the first team coach, and it was like an out-of-body experience sitting there listening to the coach at the time, who was a good guy, but it just wasn't me. And I always visualised stuff, and I just visualised as a player playing in the first team, and then coaching, visualising being the head coach, and again, you know, just knowing that when the opportunity came, that's what I wanted to do, and that's all I ever wanted to do.
Right, there's so much gold in all your answers. Even the reaching out to an old teammate. One of the words on the wall that I walked past said loyalty. So you actually live it. They're not just words on the wall. I really appreciate that. You mentioned in your previous answer the passion for youth. Can I go there with the Mariners? Because this club, could you explain the success of this club of late for me, knowing the Mariners and knowing it's a pretty small place in the central coast of New South Wales in Australia, and you are now the #1 development club across Asia. We've all just watched the FIFA World Cup, and we've watched 3 of your players that you brought through here, and now they're moving on to bigger and better things. You mentioned the word passion for youth development. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit for me, and maybe share a few more stats there that I don't know, but it's incredible, mate. And you were heading up this youth into your first team. So like, you've done the whole journey with them. Those guys that we're talking about at the World Cup, that's you. Do they pay you a commission or the club?
No,
okay.
No, don't give me it. No, I get a thank you off the players, but no,
Yeah.
In terms of the youth development side of it, you know, after Mike Phelan left, you know, the opportunity came up to take the under-23 team, and I jumped at it, and I took that role for 2 years. And fortunately for me, you know, on the coaching journey, I met a guy called Sergio Raimundo, who's my assistant coach now. I met him over on the UEFA badges over in Europe, and I always remember thinking, this guy is so far ahead of everyone else on the course. And when I got to know him, you know, he'd coached at Benfica Academy, which is one of the biggest development clubs in the world, probably the most successful development club in the world, and he'd worked with, you know, the likes of Bernardo Silva and Cancelo, currently at Man City, as well as many others. And as soon as I knew that, once I got the under-23 role here, and the head in the academy, I wanted to bring him in as my assistant, and yeah, I brought him in, and yeah, we started virtually just revamp the whole academy here. For years, when the Mariners started, it developed a lot of young players. You know, your Matty Ryans, Bernie Abinis, Tommy Rodriguez, and yeah, the club was well known for that back in the day. And then yeah, for many years that stopped. You know, there wasn't the production of young players. There was a lot of money wasted by coaches on foreign players and recycled A-League players. And my philosophy always, as a player that was given his debut at 18 years old by a coach that believed in him, in you know, one of the biggest leagues in the world, in English Championship, I always said, when I get the opportunity, you know, I'm going to believe in young players, because what you get with young players is honesty, is you know, their love for the club, and the Mariners, you know, it's no secret we're the lowest budget team in the competition. We're not in Sydney, we're not in Melbourne. You know, the club struggles for sponsorships. And yeah, look, the only way for this club to be successful and compete is to develop your own players, because the fact is that your own players, they don't cost big salaries because nobody else gives them the opportunity. So I think to be able to take the academy for 2 years and work with a lot of young players, as well as set up a scouting sort of department across Australia through contacts who I trust and respect. You know, we had a lot of success in the academy, and ultimately when I got the first team job, you know, my clear goal was there was no money in the budget, and that suited me perfectly. And I always remember people, I won't mention names, saying you're crazy, you know, don't take the job. This club's got no money. You know, at the time there was a couple of boys on massive salaries, like salaries that they should never have been on. And that meant there was hardly any money left to bring in players, to make the legal requirement of players on the roster. And yeah, I just saw that perfect. You know, 4 or 5 of these young boys that I've been working with, let's chuck them in the first team. And ultimately they ended up taking the place of some of the first team players. And yeah, they're the big decisions that you have to make as a coach. And I did them last season. I made some tough calls last year and big decisions. And the success we had last year was built on the academy players that came through. And in the first team now, we've got, I think last week we had 11 out of the 16 that were from the academy.
Mate, this is huge. Even the mindset of, you had no budget and you said, this is perfect. Like, a lot of people would see the negative in that, but you thought of the opportunity in that. Again, it was only influenced by your own experiences and career and people that believed in you. But this is such a story. I don't think there's any club in Australia, think of the other codes, the other sporting codes like rugby league, I felt that they would be in awe if they had, how many did you just say from the academy or in the first team?
11 from 16.
11 from 16. If they could do that, you think of the big clubs, this is such a huge story, but I don't think anyone realised it's because their leader saw that. What an opportunity. Because there are people that think the worst, and there's other people that are a bit more optimistic like yourself. Thanks for that answer. I love it. So what do you see is possible for the Central Coast Mariners? What's your vision for this club, this team?
My vision when I took over the academy was to rebuild the academy and create a conveyor belt of talent that could service the club for many years to come. And you know, the thought behind doing that was, you know, once we become a club that develops young players and ultimately sells them into Europe, which you've done in the last couple of years. You know, we could talk about Grant Quar going to Newcastle United. I think he's the first young player for a long time to go from Australia to a Premier League club. And he became the second youngest to Pele ever to play in a knockout stage of a World Cup when he played for the Socceroos at the World Cup. So that's one example.
And he just nearly scored against Argentina.
He did.
Right at the end.
He normally had that impact for us off the bench, and yeah, he's now at Newcastle United on loan at Hearts in Scotland, and that's just one example.
How does that make you feel? Because the second youngest player to Pele to ever play in a World Cup, and I'm sure for the rest of his life he sits back, he'll be sitting here one day telling stories of Nick Montgomery who believed in me. Like, how does that make you feel? Is that why you coached?
Yeah, it's one of the this question got asked me a while back, and I said the most enjoyable thing about coaching for me is giving a young player the debut, you know, and I'll never forget any debuts I've given, and I've given a lot to a lot of local boys in the last 2 years since I got the job, and you know what it means to them, you know what it means to their families, and you know, a lot of the boys here have been fans of the Mariners, you know, even the ones we brought from interstate that have been at the club for a couple of years before breaking into the first team. They become part of the Central Coast, part of the Mariners family, and you know, when you give them that debut, and think back to when I made my debut, you know, and all the hard work I went through, it's not easy to get the debut, you know, but what I always say to them is, you know, sometimes the debut is a lot easier than the longevity of staying in the team, because I think it's a real test of a player to make the debut and take the foot off the pedal, and that's one thing we don't let them do here. You know, that's just the start.
Ooh, there's a little nugget of gold. Yeah. There's a little nugget, because everybody trains this. Everybody does the same drills. Everybody does the same prep. You've just mentioned a little word there about intensity. You didn't say the word intensity, but you just mentioned something there that's again a reflection of you. If I picture you and your background and no backward steps and train and what you've seen in Europe, you've seen a level of intensity that maybe people here haven't seen. But you've just said you won't let them take the foot off the throttle. Like, can we talk a little bit more on that? Because there's a lesson in that.
Look, I think with the young players, again, when I took the role of running the academy, one thing I probably didn't mention is, you know, I put in sports psychology, which I believe in massively, and sports performance. I brought in a guy called Izio Momile, who he's actually from Wollongong, but he works in team sports. Great guy. I brought in player support from a chaplain on the Central Coast, a good friend of mine. So we sort of put resources in there, which, you know, ultimately is to accelerate the development of the players, because the reality is, players in Australia, they don't play enough games as a young player, and we're getting them at 17, 18, 19, and we're trying to accelerate them into the first team. So you have to equip them with the tools when they get there that it's not overwhelming, you know, and by doing that, I think all the support we put in, not just coaching support, you know, mental health support and sports psychology, and again, we did it by not having the resources, by people that I know and respect who wanted to help, and being able to bring them in to support me on my staff and give them the trust to have access to the players and help them, because, you know, ultimately we all want the same goal, and we want the players to develop into the first team, to break into the first team, to perform for the Mariners, to get in national teams at youth level, at top level, and then ultimately the goal for most of them is to go overseas. So to sort of facilitate that for them is a big process. It's not easy, and you need good people involved and good people on the staff, and that's one thing I learned from my time with the good coaches. That always had good people around them, you know, always had good staff, and people that were all buying into what you wanted to achieve, and it's a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah. Honestly, some of your answers are so good. I want to just dig deeper and deeper, but we don't have too much time to do that. But you mentioned their resources, and you mentioned the vision of this club. So I just want to turn it to you now. We'll finish with you, the vision for you. So you know what to do. You know this game like no one else. 30 years of living and breathing it. You have the tools. You've developed the tools, the coaching tools. Have you developed? And it looks like you've even worked on your own mindset as a coach as well. So you have the tools. Where's the desire? What's possible for you? Where are we going? I don't want to do this in a way of saying, hey, Mariners, I'm really sorry, but you won't have him forever. But you will leave a legacy here. What's possible for you?
I honestly believe in life, and anything's possible. And, you know, as a player, you know, to reach the Premier League and play in the Premier League was probably something a lot of people doubted me on. You know, I wasn't the most technical player in the world, but I had a will to work harder than anybody, and yeah, to do anything I could to get to the top, and I managed to do that. And I think with the Mariners, we've got a chairman involved at the minute. You know, he's put extra resources in athlete development, because I really believe that to get to the top of the game now, you have to be the best athlete you can be. And again, it's an effort from everybody, and I genuinely wanted to be, you know, the Mariners to be the number one development club in Australia, and last year the stats came out to say that we were number one in AFC, so the whole of Asia, China, Korea, Japan, of academy developed players in the first team, not only in the first team playing minutes, and yeah, it was, to be honest, you know, when that came out, that was one of the most proud things myself and Sergio have ever done, because we had a vision of doing that 2 years previous, and for that to happen in the first year of us being in the first team, you know, yeah, was amazing. But for me as a coach, I don't look too far ahead. You know, I really love this club, and you talk about loyalty. You know, I spent 14 years at Sheffield United. I've spent 10 years now at the Mariners. So I'm not someone that just moves on at the drop of a hat. I think there's always a time for everything, and right now I'm just loving being at this club and the people that I've brought in and what we've done, and I think we can really achieve something. You know, even the Mariners getting in the top 6 for me is overachieving. You know, last year we got in the top 6, we got to the cup final. This year, you know, our aim is to get in the top 6, and I'll always say, you know, in the A-League, to get in the top 6, that's what you have to aim for. You know, whatever happens after that it's a bit of a lottery in the playoffs. You know, you can finish 6th and be crowned champions.
Yeah.
But obviously the league title, I come from England where winning the league is the most important thing, and that's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think ultimately at the end of the season the teams deserve to be where they are on the table, and then it's like a cup competition at the end where anybody can beat anybody, and pressure and everything has to be taken into account. I'm just loving the experience at the minute. I've got great mentors in the game, you know, like Mike Phelan, Neil Warnock, you know, Kevin Blackwell, Brian Robson. I worked under Brian Robson, Brian Kidd. You know, there's so many more I could talk about that I've learnt from, you know, that I can pick up the phone to if I need. But right now I've got good support from my family, number one, and my friends here, and yeah, the Mariners fans are amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful community, and it's great to see everyone coming back and supporting the team. So I think post-COVID, everything's getting back on its feet now, and post the World Cup, I think the value of Australian football is on the rise. The value of Australian players is on the rise because you know, it's the first time the country's just got to the knockout stage of a World Cup in a long time, and there's some big countries that never got to the World Cup. So yeah, really excited for the future. But right now, all I think about is the next game, and that's Wellington Phoenix away this Sunday.
I probably expect nothing less from you to just say, all I'm focused on is this, because that's a trait of the best athletes, best coaches. They're very present right now. What's important right now. And you've nailed it. So just let me say it then. Sorry, Mariners, you won't be here forever. But you did mention there how loyal you are. 10 years, 15 years somewhere else. This is such a ruthless game. If you're no good, you're spat out in 2 years, 1 year. If you're no good as a player, an administrator, a backroom staffer, a head coach especially. Talk about English Premier League. A head coach's career is not that long in certain clubs. Whoever buys you next has got someone who's willing to stay there for 10 years. I hope they're willing the same way, because it's ruthless, mate. If you're no good, it spits you out. And you're very good, mate. You're very good, which is why I'm so happy to have you on this podcast. Thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing today. The feeling I had when I walked in here was so good. There's something special happening at the Mariners. And yeah, thanks.
It's my pleasure.
Legend.
Cheers, Hayden.
Some of the best learning you will ever do will be travelling. Give yourself space, time to creatively think, to learn, to meet people, or take a vacation with your family. Give yourself that time. And there's no better person or people or company to help you than the people at Tripadeal. Their experienced agents will look after you from start to finish. They will plan your flights, your accommodation, your car, your excursions, whatever you need. If you want to plan a trip of a lifetime, Tripadeal is the place to go. Tripadeal.com.au. If you enjoyed this episode, I know you will love the audio version of the Wayne Bennett episode, which you can find on all major podcast platforms. Get the Edge with Hayden Knowles.